You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Greetings, followers. It is I, your host, Cardinal Sin, and today we have episode number 17 of Into the Fringe with Peter Robbins. And Peter Robbins is an investigative writer, best-selling author, and lecturer, well known for his UFO-related papers, columns, articles, editorials, commentaries, and talks. He is a regular fixture on talk radio and podcasts, and has appeared as a guest on and consultant to numerous television programs and documentaries. He is host of the weekly radio show / podcast, Meanwhile Here on Earth, Monday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Among the venues Peter has spoken at are the National Press Club in Washington, Manhattan's Juilliard School and the School of Visual Arts, Boston's Cambridge Hospital, Cornell University, the University of Arkansas, the Fund for UFO Research, British UFO Research Association conferences, venues in Brazil, Greece, France, UFO conferences across the U.S., and a 15-city speaking tour of the U.K. Robbins was editorial assistant on a United Nations Secretary General's requested report for the establishment of a UN UFO department, and editorial assistant for a requested paper for the House of Lords debate on UFOs. He was a founding member of Bud Hopkins Intruders Foundation and served as executive assistant to Mr. Hopkins. He was event coordinator for the Sci-Fi Channel's Alien Abduction Phenomenon, a symposium, organized to promote the release of Steven Spielberg's miniseries Taken, and has written for Open Minds Magazine, Fate, Phenomena, UF Data Magazine, UFO Matrix, UFO Magazine, both UK and US, Outer Limits Magazine, and numerous other publications. Peter has been an advisor, consultant, and co-founder to numerous UFO festivals and conferences around the world. In 2012, Robbins was made member of the French Académie d'Ufologie and invited to give testimony at the Citizens' Hearing on Disclosure at the National Press Club. Peter is an associate producer of the award-winning documentary Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton, and most recently, the producer and writer of the documentary The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death of James Forrestal. He lives and works in the countryside just outside of Ithaca, New York. Welcome back, my friend Peter Robbins, to Into the Fringe.
Thank you, Cardinal. It's good to be back.
New York. Welcome back, my friend Peter Robbins, to Into the Fringe.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
It's wonderful to have you here. I do look forward to our visits, I must say.
Very good.
They're always enlightening and very interesting. First, I'd like to acknowledge some folks in our chat. Ivan Ivanovich is here, and Lawrence Martin says, hello, everyone. Good to see you guys are here. And I thought maybe we might just go ahead and jump right in, if that works for you. Last time we left off just touching on Dr. Wilhelm Reich, his research into orgone and its relationship to UFOs. I thought maybe we would start there today, and since it's such a massive topic, just lay a little groundwork for next month's show on Wilhelm Reich and its and orgone, its relationship to UFOs.
Yeah, I am kind of in an unusual situation regarding Reich's work in that I was introduced to it when I was still a teenager. So it has been a part of my life for the great majority of my life. And it was first an intellectual interest, having nothing to do with the UFO phenomena, which formed kind of a coda to Reich's work in the last few years of his life. It was a subject that he had no interest in up until the last few years of his life. My interest continued to grow through university and into my 20s. And by the time I was 30, I was actually a patient of a gentleman, a psychotherapist named Dr. Ellsworth F. Baker. Baker had been Reich's first assistant for the last 11 years of Reich's life. And I worked with Baker for almost 7 years, very important time for me and helped me to become the person I am. But equally important in a way was that through Dr. Baker and associates, I got to meet many of the people who were still alive, who knew and had worked with Dr. Reich in various capacities, either as patients or students or laboratory assistants. His biographer, Dr. Myron Sharaff, and became very involved in the full sweep of his work. I worked as a volunteer for the American College of Orgonomy just outside of Princeton, New York for some years in helping fundraising to make that an actual place rather than just an organization on paper. I studied Reich's social and scientific work in a wonderful series of night courses not offered for many years now at New York University. I took part in a seminar for several years based in the seminars that Dr. Freud used to have that Reich was involved in as Freud's first assistant in the latter 1920s. When I became involved in UFO studies, that area of his work that I had no interest in became a primary interest to me. One of the reasons that I suggested to Gil that we did not have a conversation about Reich's UFO work off the bat was because it's really the worst place to start. If it's devoid of a knowledge of how his scientific work and his keen observations as a observer on the social scene as fascism swept through Europe and then his escape to America, it's so isolating and can make people feel that he was deluded in some way because there's no point of reference. All of Wilhelm Reich's work, evolving from, in a way, his childhood and growing up in a very rural estate in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire before World War I, and seeing natural functioning and plants and animals close up, all getting vaporized during the war, studying with Freud, going on to study cancer formation, how pathologies set into the body and physiologically create what he termed armoring, chronic tightening of the musculature that changes your respiration, that changes the way you hold yourself, that changes your attitudes in life. the way that unexpressed rage kind of bounces off and comes out as very unsatisfying sarcasm, the way that repressed sexuality has destroyed a great deal of the quality of human life on Earth. And all of his work is about how energy functions. And so in the early 1950s, when UFO activity was observed over his estate in Maine, where he settled and worked for the last years of his life, a beautiful area in southern Maine called Rangeley, where it is now the Wilhelm Reich Museum. And if you're able, I would certainly encourage anyone to visit, but go online first or call them, because they're not open on a regular round the clock, kind of basis. Anyway, with that understood, I thought, as Cardinal has suggested, that I just kind of introduce this subject, so to say, this evening, and that we get into it next week. Part of the challenge for me, as I'm a layperson, I'm not a scientist. My degrees are in painting and film history, but I'm something of an autodidact, and if something interests me, I inform myself as well as I can about it. I've replicated certain experiments of Reich. I've spoken at international conferences on his work in Oregon, in New York City, in Athens, in Central Greece, in Nice, France, and in Rome. So I know my material, but again, most people that have an opinion about him or an attitude about him or a criticism have never read a single word that he's ever written. Mm-hmm. And there are probably 25 books in print by Dr. Wilhelm Reich. The problem is there are many, 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 many books in print about Dr. Reich by people that have attitudes and
no clue.
Well, they may have a clue, but they have agendas, and they very rarely include embracing, supporting, or actually trying to understand the depth of his work. It's dangerous. It goes against the great social fabric. I will always embrace it. I think it's the most important body of scientific work to yet be acknowledged by official science. And it's still some ways to go till that could possibly happen. But I would say if anybody's interested in the interim, that they go online to their favorite book site. Most of his books are out of print, but a good used book site, one of my favorites is Abe Books, like Abe Lincoln, ABEBOOKS.com, that usually has 8 or 10 million books on hand at any point.
The Advanced Book Exchange, if I remember correctly.
Yep. There are so many out there, The main thing is he wrote about so many seemingly separate subjects that if you don't know better, it sounds like he's all over the place. And he is, because the common thread, and it runs as straight as a gun sight through all of his work over more than 35 years, is how energy functions. Everything from how amoebas split to the dynamics of a storm, to the dynamics of how a star system is born and dies, to human orgasm, to you name it. And it's a simple formula. Tension as in electrical tension, charge and as in an increasing electrical charge, discharge, relaxation. It applies, again, to almost every area of natural functioning, from a one-celled creature splitting into a two-celled creature to the formation of a star system. Otherwise, though, I think that lays out the basics, except to say that, you might want to go online and look at the availability of books by Dr. Wilhelm Reich and see if one of those subjects that he writes about interest you, and just start to read it. The first book I read of his was called Character Analysis, which is a formal early book on psychology. But his books on human pathology, human suffering, why we're such a mess, how we can break through, are so enlightening and so informed. He was one of the greatest observers of the human condition that I've ever come across in an awful lot of reading and being out there in the world for a considerable amount of time. So let's leave that at there and go on to whatever the Cardinal suggests we move on to next, and come back to that next week.
It sounds to me like you're a big fan.
Fan's not really the word. For me, certain bodies of knowledge, after you've read X number of books for X number of years, experienced it in your own body, observed it in nature, had the opportunity to meet with people around the world who also respect and understand the principles that he established, and in great part use them to govern their behavior, or at least inform their activities in life. I don't know if fan's the word, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. This reminds me of something I wanted to mention since you were last on. I remember we talked for a short time about Nikola Tesla, and someone mentioned his death ray, and that's in air quotes, and wanted to know if you were familiar with it, and if so, what your thoughts were about it.
Well, a very lurid name for a device that he is alleged to have created, put forward, but that I've never seen anything substantial on. One of the things about Tesla's genius is that he had a memory that was quite photographic, and much to the frustration of posterity, he could visualize a device in his mind with several hundred working parts to such a degree that he didn't need a schematic to create it. It was documented repeatedly, I think, that he could literally visualize things to 1/100th of an inch or some micro measurement like that. And a lot of his inventions, the early ones certainly were drawn out and filed with patent offices and things. I've seen quite a number of them, and they're fascinating even for a layperson. But many of them he carried in his head. And like a number of mythical figures, it's seductive to mix the absolute documented truths about Nikola Tesla and demonstrated devices with the myth, the legend, the lore, the rumors, many of which may be true, but we have nothing that can establish them per se. So, long answer to your short question. Like you, I've heard of the death ray, and we likely have something like that now, I would imagine, whether it's based on Tesla's original thinking or not, or whether it ever really was a viable invention. I just don't know. I do know that he died, I believe, in 1941 or so, certainly in the early 40s, in the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan on West 34th and 8th Street, which my father used to delight in telling me is where I was conceived. So I'm not saying that there's a connection, but he departed from the same place that I arrived, so to say.
Not surprising somehow. I would like to take this opportunity to mention our giveaways today. For anybody that's in the listening audience or in the chat, we're going to have some giveaways based on how many people we can get in the chat by the end of the show. So for every 10 people we have in the chat by the end of the show, we'll give one item away randomly. And Peter has been gracious enough to offer another copy of his DVD documentary, The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death of James Forrestal. I will be giving away a copy of UFO investigator and Kansas State MUFON director Tom Nickel and Kansas State sectional director Mark Davenport on the Mike Murphy Show, an autographed lecture program by Mark Davenport, as well as flyers of the events that I put on that he spoke at, and my personal copy of Out of the Blue by James Fox, a great UFO documentary, and 2 lectures on disc by Leah Haley and Mark Davenport. So if you are of a mind, give yourself more chances to win, and share that link out there on your social media if you'd like, and I will leave it at that. So, Peter, my next question is, what's so special about the 1989 Voronezh incident, and what makes it Russia's best-known CE3 case?
You're referring to a UFO landing that occurred in the old Soviet Union, right on the cusp of it disintegrating into the modern Russian state. It's special in a number of respects. First, that we even heard about it in the West, that it was unique in that change was bubbling away in the Soviet Union, and up until that point, to the best of my knowledge, no UFO incident that occurred within the greater Soviet Union was openly acknowledged as such by the Soviet state, and if anything was repressed, and we never heard about it here, and probably it was not widely promoted in the Soviet Union as well. In September of 1989, the event happened, and as occasionally happens in the world of UFO studies, an event is reported that's kind of off the charts in terms of having a lot of in common with other cases. Flatwoods Monster, so to say, the Mothman case in West Virginia. There's a handful of them that stand out as completely unique. It doesn't mean that they're fake or that they didn't happen. We have to sometimes remind ourselves that we're dealing with the unknown here. Even if you've been dealing with it for a long time, as I have, it's still unknown. It's one of the reasons why I never feel comfortable with anybody referring to me as an expert. It's the ultimate oxymoron. I'm an expert on the unknown. Please. Some UFOs, UAPs, are genuinely anomalous and very likely, overwhelmingly likely, representative of advanced technology from parts unknown under intelligent control. The event in the Soviet Union, first, as interesting as the event was to me, the way that it was covered in the Soviet Union and then covered in the United States were equally interesting to me. In the event, late afternoon, in the city of Voronezh, which is about 300 miles southwest, I think, of Moscow, good-sized city, a UFO was observed by many witnesses to come down in a public park and land in a tree. And a hatch opened and a being got out and climbed down the tree, tall, followed by a short robot type being. And they proceeded to move through the park. School had let out. Many of the witnesses were children. Another UFO came in and left. A child screamed something, and I believe the tall being went back into the craft, came back with some kind of handheld apparatus, and made the child disappear. The child was made to reappear before they departed, and so on. Accounts were taken, and immediately the events began to be investigated, as they would here, by local UFO investigators. Now, that was in September. In October, the story broke here. And again, what made it unique was that it broke through TASS, the official Soviet news agency. This was unheard of and put forward as a very serious, real event. Obviously, the next day, that afternoon, broadcast news started to broadcast the story, but the next day it hit the papers. And from the get-go, the major national papers were very demeaning, somewhat sarcastic. If they were starting to take it seriously, the next day they weren't taking it seriously. Smaller regional papers did take it seriously. And in the Soviet Union, it was taken very seriously. I, at that time, lived in Midtown Manhattan and had the TV on in the background when the very first news reports were coming across TV. And it was a report from TASS. And I thought, I've never even imagined this before, but their offices were in Rockefeller Center, and I lived only about 10 blocks from there. And I thought, I'm going to call them and tell them I'm an investigative writer and put on my most serious adult voice and see if I can talk to anybody there. Well, not only were they respectful and interested to hear from an American writer who took the subject seriously, they invited me to their offices. And half an hour later, that's just where I was, surrounded by Russian people speaking pretty good English, even giving me original copies of telexes coming across their machines and the like. It was a very exciting day for me. The stories continued to come. I archived them all and put them away. I was hard at work on a book left at Eastgate about the Rendlesham Forest incident, and this would just have to, be backburnered. But less than a year later, ironically, I heard from the editor of the bi-yearly journal published by the American College of Orgonomy. Orgonomy, a word that Wilhelm Reich coined because he called the energy, the sea of energy that we all live in, orgon. His arbitrary name rooted in organism. It's the same thing that the Hindus called the prana, that the Victorians called the ether. He called it orgon. No big deal. Anyway, the editor, who is an old friend of mine and a psychiatrist, said, I've just received a letter from a professor in the Soviet Union asking for a complimentary copy of the publication, which I'm sending him, but he sent me a copy of a book about this UFO investigation that he and colleagues had just completed in the city in southwestern Russia. I'm sending you the book and his address. You might want to get in touch with him. Well, I did. And his name is, I hope still, Yuri Lazotsev, and he's an associate professor of, I believe, stress in materials metallurgy, who taught at a local university and was part of a UFO investigative team. English quite good. This is, again, 1989, 1990. It's pre-internet. And we started to do what people used to do in those cases. We used to write letters to each other. And I think if it had happened a year before, everything that we wrote back and forth would have been open by the Soviets to check the contents. But they were busy with other things. Things had really started to come undone, if you check a timeline.
Crumbling down, as they might say.
Yeah. And we both sensed that it was okay to be fairly open with each other. And within a few correspondences, we were really developing not just a good colleagueship and exchanging information, but a friendship. And ultimately started to send each other books, small gifts, talk about our families and things. And talking about ufology in the Soviet Union, then now Russia, and then, compared to here. And we kept that going for about 3 years. It will remain for me a very enigmatic case, in that, again, there are things that are reported, as you see in these wonderful illustrations, that don't fit the norm. Let's remember, though, in the world of the unknown relative to UFO-related phenomena, we're probably, in fact, I don't even consider that we're dealing with one intelligence or civilization that's been coming and going from planet Earth to wherever, to their home galaxy, planet, universe, or dimension, who knows? We may well be dealing with a myriad of them, and each one having a different relationship with, or intentions about, or feelings toward humanity. So the fact that this one, for whatever reason, defies the norm of many other accounts we have from around the world over the decades, that's the way it is. One thing I did not ever get any sense of in doing my research on it, nor did I get any hint of from Yuri or any of the accounts that I read or saw, including some help with original Russians by a friend of mine who was born in the Soviet Union, is any hint of fabrication, hoax, a desire to fool the public. What happened seems to have happened. It just doesn't fit into any normal pattern. I should also say, in this picture is a perfect example, that where the craft and the beings made physical contact with organic material, the tree, soil, the physiology of that organic material was transformed dramatically, in some cases, in terms of the amount of X or Y that would be associated with that soil in another part of the park, or on the tree trunk, things that just can't be accounted for outside of this truly anomalous event. Do you have any other questions regarding this case, Cardinal?
What makes it such an important incident, and what makes it Russia's best known CE3 case? I guess you've answered the second part of the question with all the coverage that it got, both here and in the Soviet Union. Is there something special about it as a CE3 case that maybe we don't know?
Very possible. However, the first thing that makes it special is that not only were we allowed to know about it here in the West, but that the official Soviet news agency, with the full backing of the disintegrating Soviet Empire, allowed this information to come forth and confirmed it on the governmental level. The other thing is, in terms of its importance in cases in the Soviet Union, we have so little information, or had so little information, on cases in the Soviet Union that we didn't have much to compare it to. For me, another thing that makes it important is the way it was attacked and ridiculed by the United States media. What they were coming back with was, oh, the Russian people are not used to this kind of freedom of expression. We all know they're kind of mystical and, a bit provincial. And so they're all caught up in a kind of a cross between mystical and tabloid thinking and exaggerating things in the press. Overall, extremely insulting to a media that was doing its best to cover the events in a fair-minded, scientific way, which my best understanding is they did. But it was easy to twist around here in the West, and, yet once again, nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along.
Yeah. Which potentially segues into my next question. Why do you think humanity remains so seemingly divided regarding the subject of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity?
Isn't that one of the biggest and most important questions? A number of reasons. And I say that with the understanding, as many of your listeners probably know, we are now hovering at an historic moment, certainly in the history of UFO studies, but maybe an historic moment, period. I believe it's June 24th that the Pentagon is due to release what they say is a substantial piece of information on this phenomena. We'll see how substantial once it's released, but it might be enough.
Is this being released to Congress?
It's being released to the public, as well as to our elected officials at the same time. That's my understanding. I'm not sure if it's the 24th, but it's toward the end of June. Easy enough to Google. The first thing is, we all grew up with a certain understanding in our Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, atheist realities of the way that the world is. And for most of us, it did not include real visitations from other intelligences from parts unknown. For some people, that has always challenged certain parts of religious dogma that they were brought up to understand was actual fact. And for other people, it's just kind of scary and creepy and emblematic of the unknown. It also flies in the face of the official position that has, up until the last few years, unshakably been put forward that whatever they are, they're misunderstood somethings, even if they're exotic misunderstoods. And yes, there are some exceptions, but oh gosh, are you one of those people that believes in flying saucers from Mars? For me, as a serious student of how ridicule became attached to this subject, I find this whole dynamic that's been going on since 1947 completely fascinating, in part because our grandparents, whoever, in terms of how old you are, was sold an amazing bill of goods by the American press, I'm sure with the tacit assistance or encouragement of the American government, in the summer of 1947, and it stuck. It goes like this. Let's just say we lived in a sane world. I know that's a stretch. And that in 1947, for example, the Cardinal and I are friends and neighbors, and we see each other on the street, and I say, Cardinal Sin, the strangest thing happened to me yesterday afternoon or last night. I was out walking the dog or playing with the kids or barbecuing some dinner or reading a book in the yard. And I looked up and I saw this thing or things. It was, or they were, round or oval or triangular shaped or a rectangle or no bigger than stars or bigger than two battleships. And they moved in the following way. They didn't make any noise. And after a while, they just took off like rockets and were gone or just drifted away. And I wonder what it was I saw yesterday afternoon or last night. In a sane world, my neighbor would probably say or think, gee, Peter, that's interesting. I wonder what you saw too. Is that a fair assessment of how you might react in that hypothetical situation, Cardinal Sin?
Sure, but we've been programmed to do otherwise.
Ah, exactly. How did that happen? And everything about our responses is so antithetical. It's so illogical. Even hearing ourselves say it or think it, we should self-correct. But that's how deeply ingrained it is. It goes like this. Oh, you saw something in the sky that you can't identify? Well, are you weird?
What are you, an expert on what flies now?
Do you want to fool me? Are you a mystic? Are you insane? Are you trying to be famous in some strange way? Do you want to be on the radio or television? What's really going on with you? As opposed to, I wonder what you saw in the sky. I'd have that same feeling if I saw something I couldn't understand. This is amazingly effective programming when you think about it. And the way it was done was major media, starting with the Kenneth Arnold sightings in late June of 1947 overall. And I say major media because regional and local newspapers and radio stations tended to take the subject far more seriously than that small group of broadcasters, CBS, NBC, smaller broadcasters around the country, and the big national newspapers, who every single day, every report, were giving us pseudo-scientific explanations. We're pushing the idea it's, the war is not that long ago. We still have war jitters. The Soviets are poised to be our next new enemy. And interestingly, and this is, I think, purely historical chance, the summer of 1947 was the official beginning of the Cold War, per se. It superimposed itself on the birth of the so-called modern age of UFO sightings perfectly. And don't think for a minute that the Soviets and the Americans didn't play it off of each other and off of their own people as a way of upfusing some things that they were doing or accusing each other of certain things or of covering up other things. Oh, look, it must be a UFO report when it was really some kind of weapons test. Or it was a weapons test manufactured in the minds of the people that moved the chess pieces to cover up an actual UFO event. And again, it was very effective. But it held by, not even by the end of the summer of 1947, by the end of July of 1947, the American people, and by extension the Western world, had bought the bull and essentially saying, yeah, I don't want to be embarrassed. Everybody knows now that if you believe that these flying saucers, or what they call flying saucers, or any strange thing that's seen in the sky is, a Martian spaceship or something from someplace else, as opposed to something we're working on, with new technology that we stole from the Germans, or that we captured from the Germans, or some Russian experimental craft that's scaring the hell out of us. I don't want to be made fun of, so I'm going to laugh at it too, even though there may be something to it. and it replicated itself. And then we roll into the early 50s when the CIA decides this is working very well, but let's codify it, let's lock it down. And there's a series of meetings over 4 days headed by a doctor, trying to remember, Robertson panel report of different specialists and experts and consultants. And what it was about was educating, in quotes, the American people so that they would better understand that any future UFO reports were whatever they were. They were
taken
not
care of. Yeah.
Exactly. All's good here. And the notes exist. You don't have to be a UFO scholar to get them. Google, I'm sure you can just find them in a couple of hits. The Robertson Panel UFO Report 1952, and you'll have it. It's fascinating. A lot of it's very dry reading, but other parts are phenomenally interesting. And you see how even at the time, well before he became the heroic leading man in the world of scientific study of UFOs, the great Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the head astronomer at Northwestern University in Illinois, that he was a paid shill by the CIA. In the early 70s, he admitted it. He basically made his mea culpas and then went on to champion the cause of true UFO studies. But he is an enthusiastic participant in this exercise. To the best of my knowledge, also, Cardinal, Robert, as a writer who really loves language and wonders about derivation of terms sometimes, I think that the Robertson panel, and I'd love to find out if anybody predates this, is the first place I've ever seen the word debunk used, which speaks for itself. It's part of common parlance now. The word bunk, and that's a lot of bunk, goes back to the 20s or 30s at least, maybe even the 19th century.
Yeah.
To debunk, I think, is a word that may have been confabulated right there or come out of that cover-up
It seems to
mentality.
mean the same thing as to take the piss out of.
Yes, exactly the same. That's more a British phrase, but it worked brilliantly. There wasn't a lot that they had to do. Fear of ridicule is incredibly powerful. I spent years, again, just researching the impact of it on public figures. Many elected officials who took the subject seriously, some who ran for president, some who wanted to run for president, some who became president, everybody ultimately backed down, except for Congressman from New Mexico, very
Stephen
courageous.
Schiff?
Yeah, who died of cancer at like 35 or so, as I recall, but had a close to 95% mandate from the people of New Mexico who elected him to get to the bottom of this. I'm not suggesting that, his death was suspicious, and I'm suggesting that that's not out of the question either.
Right.
I have no idea, but he never backed down. Many other people in government realized, I can't do this and have a shot at keeping my job. I've got to say, oh, it was silly. I changed my mind. I don't know what I was thinking about, etc. And it's only up until the past few years that, again, this ridicule factor is beginning to slip away in a major way, especially since late 2017. And we have now the makings of a very interesting situation, depending on what this release of information is at the end of June. It may be a lot of smoke. It may be a smoking gun. It may be something between. But if it's I'm used to being disappointed on this stuff. In fact, I don't even let myself be disappointed, because every few years when there's a flurry of activity and X or Y person says it's going to happen soon. I'm not holding my breath or
Nor I.
losing any sleep over it.
Yeah.
This is different, though. This is different. And since 2004, when the Navy has always been involved in this subject from the get-go, make no mistake about it.
Mm-hmm.
But 2004, they started to cover up more. Now this stuff is all coming out relative to what is in the news in the UFO world regularly about the Tic Tac UFOs and the USS Princeton and the Nimitz and pilot sightings and new personalities coming into the UFO world who are now coming directly from the Navy and the State Department, etc. Things are changing.
It still seems to me, if I may, that they're couching whatever this is as, yeah, it's real. We don't know what it is. It's exotic. It's not from here, but they're couching it as a threat. So it's almost exactly as good as an entire cover up, because we don't know what it is or where it comes from or why it's here, but it's a threat.
Yes. You bring up a very important point I was just about to drift into. The UFO community has always been basically split on this, but it's been exacerbated the past few years that people seem more and more militantly taking up the flag for their good. They're here to help us. If they were bad, we'd all be vaporized by now, or we'd know it because, and then the other side is we have to be cautious. We can't trust them. The government, i.e., our military intelligence community in this sense overall, by nature, is about defense and about caution. Also about control and controlling information. I think one of the points that has slipped away or that is not being discussed because it's much easier to go black and white on each other is we're probably, as far as I'm concerned, we are dealing with a myriad of other intelligences, some of them who manifest themselves as very pro-human, want to help us with our struggle to evolve, want to perhaps help us to turn around the incredible damage we have done to our home. They may even have an intention to try to help, although that's an abstract, where the other side is just, we're creating hybrids and you're ruining the real estate here, which we have a special relationship with.
A stake in, yeah.
Yep. And yes, we do take you every once in a while. We follow bloodlines. Sorry if it freaks you out. It's nothing personal. It's just what we're involved in doing for reasons that you'll either find out or not find out as things move forward.
Yeah.
And people are making each other wrong about both things. I look back at, I think it was just a childhood story and a very good little fable or analogy to try to understand that there are great differences in the same thing. It's the 6 blind men and the elephant trying to explain to each other what the elephant is. One of them has got his arms wrapped around the leg. The other one's holding on to a trunk. The other one's got the ear. The other one is holding on to the tail. The other one's patting the elephant's side. And the other one is holding the trunk. And they're all right, but as far as they're concerned, each one, the other one is wrong. Because I know what an elephant is. I'm holding on to it right now. This is the problem this is a major problem in where we are right now as we moving through the eye of the needle, possibly into a new era or error of understanding or of misunderstanding the phenomena at hand. And that's exciting, but at the same time, it's perplexing and potentially disturbing. Make no mistake about it, as much as the Pentagon has said it's going to release information and it's important, you know the nature of the beast. They're
Oh
going to
yeah,
do their best.
it'll be redacted. The stuff that
Well,
isn't redacted will be, meaningless
no,
dribble.
I think it may actually be profound, but what they're not saying may be even more profound. And I think, in fact, let's try for a moment to put ourselves in their position. We've been sitting on information that we've been continuing to accumulate and learn more about and develop within that small circle of secret keepers for 75 years at least. Next year is the 75th anniversary of Roswell and Kenneth Arnold.
That's right.
It's going to be a banner year.
Yeah.
And we are now charged. The government has said you need to come forward and tell us something important here.
Is that what predicated this? Did the government say you need to come forward, or were they forced into it by people like Luis Elizondo and Commander Traver? Is that his name?
Yeah. It's been coming from both directions. There are now former government and former military and former intelligence people who are too credible and too well established to dismiss. At the same time, you have people within government, like the latest is Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
I could care less what anybody thinks about his politics. I'm not a fan. But he's put himself on the line and said, release this. This is important. Stop this cover up. Very interesting. He probably would not have done that a year or two ago because he'd be afraid that people would make fun of him and he wouldn't be reelected. Now that ridicule factor is diminished that much.
Look what happened to Dennis Kucinich.
That's right. That's right. Harry Reid, former
had
Speaker
to
of the
wait
House.
until he was retired.
Yeah, Harry Reid, well in his 80s right now, but back in the news because he has been obsessed with this subject for decades. He's the one who, in 2004, after the original, Navy flight videos were turned over to the forces that be, advocated funding a study on UFOs for $20 million within Congress. That's a small amount of the federal budget. But when it hit the pages of the New York Times in December of 2017, it triggered something of an avalanche of people who now felt, wait a minute, somebody major in government took it that seriously and other people backed him, and the New York Times is publishing it. And, whatever I can't feel about the New York Times, they're an establishment major player here. And then, you have people on the left and the right. It doesn't matter now whether it's Fox or CNBC or CNN. Everybody's taking it seriously. So
are they?
It may be very surprising. I'm for the first time in my life in this work, I think that we may be seeing a point of real change in public life that will manifest itself as the first serious congressional investigation into this subject. And if it happens, that investigation is going to break down into committees. And those committees are going to learn things. And ultimately, for the first time in history, it's not out of the question. I'm just spinning one scenario here that may well not happen, but it may for the first time because that ridicule factor is so diminished. But if those congressional investigation committees' reports are compelling enough, then for the first time, a sitting president of the United States, doesn't matter who it is, can finally step forward and say, well, based on everything that is coming to us, going back now, not even to 1947, although I've now seen information that I could not have imagined before, but since 2004 and these things that were photographed by Nimitz and Princeton and these pilots, and what's come to us now from the civilian sector that is real, I am in a position to say we're not alone in the universe, and we're not sure what their objectives are, but we are not alone. And
Are you talking about Avi Loeb?
Another, former Secretary of Defense of Israel. I think, again, some of these past power people have their own agendas. Paul Hillier, a man who I know a little bit, respected player, a former Secretary of Defense of Canada in the 1960s.
And of NATO as a whole, I think.
That's right. Who is now a very vocal spokesman for the reality of alien technology and the like. I've heard people put him down because he's old. Well, it's not quite good enough. I agree with some things that he says and not with others. We've talked about it, not recently, but I certainly respect the guy. Avi Loeb, again, you hear somebody who was a former Secretary of Defense of, a real country, and one very much in the news these days, who is also saying it's real. And now more and more people, I mean, the list of them is amazing. But we will be hearing more about this, and many of your listeners and viewers here were tuned in to CBS this past Sunday, or have since seen the clip from 60 Minutes, the segment from 60 Minutes, which when I first watched it, I thought, I don't know, it's not.
Isn't that cute?
However, when I thought about it, literally starting immediately after, I said, hang on, this wasn't aimed at you, schmuck. Right. This was aimed at Mr. and Mrs. America. And these two men were very credible. And the interviewer took it seriously. And this isn't some fly-by-night goofball station. This is 60 Minutes, with the history of more than 50 years of overall very good journalism to a great degree. This was important. By the same token, if you Google another institution on CBS, their Sunday morning show, which is called Sunday Morning, which has also been running for about 50 years, they did a piece Sunday morning rather than Sunday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which might as well have been 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It was total crap. And its featured person was Seth Shostak, Mr. Seti, couldn't wipe the grin off his face.
Yeah.
Begin the segment with stills from black and white B-movies, a clip from Close Encounters, another flying saucer movie. Their correspondent, I wanted to throw a drink in his face. I mean, once again, that smarmy,
a double, please.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Throw a double pathetic in his face.
Yeah. So, there we have it. But we are at an exciting moment, and we're not going to have to wait that much longer. A little over a month. We'll see what happens.
And that brings me to a question asked by Steve Mitchell, who says, this isn't really my area of knowledge. Why did they shut down Project Blue Book, and is SETI still a thing? And I'd like to try to take a crack at this and then let you correct me if and when I'm wrong. My understanding is they shut down Project Blue Book because it did its job. It was a public relations effort. It was not truly expected to uncover any truth or evidence about UFOs, which it did accidentally do. And SETI is still a thing, although it's not publicly funded, it's privately funded. How off the mark was I?
Not much. I agree with you. It did its job in that its job was to look like it was doing something. And, they filed a lot of reports and looked at stuff, answered the phone a lot. In 1968, the rationale was the Air Force has said, well, we've done everything we can do, in so many words.
If we want to control the narrative, we have to pretend to investigate.
Right. We've lost interest in it, even though a full 15% or so of these reports are completely impossible to acknowledge in conventional terms. They're complete mysteries to us. However, we're now out of the business, 1968. And of course, they remained in the business. They just didn't talk about it. Project Blue Book is closed, and that's that as far as the public is concerned. Civilian organizations try to fill in some of the gaps, but again, it was a PR setup from the start. Seti certainly is, on one level, an important scientific effort, but it's been used, how can I say?
Wrongly.
Yeah, wrongly is the word. Essentially, it's, we're men and women of science. We're on the case. We're looking out there. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. Surely, we have PhDs. We are respected by each other. And surely if there are life in the universe, we'll be the ones to pick up on it, folks. So stay with us and we'll get back to you if anything happens. As opposed to study this anomalous site. How come, this sand melted into glass? How come this person was observed to be missing at a moment where 20 neighbors observed a disc-shaped craft over the house, as opposed to the catch-22 is, I'm a real scientist. I can't be caught looking at a UFO book. I can't be caught taking flying saucers seriously. I'll lose my street cred. And so...
And my grant money.
Exactly. This is what it's come down to. Again, SETI is defunded some years ago by the government, but there are plenty of foundations and the like who are picking up the tab. And occasionally you learn, hear something, they're getting some kind of information from somewhere that's intriguing, but so far no go. And the fact that only now are elements within the official scientific community waking up to say, maybe these regular folks, some of who are scientifically credentialed, others who are self-taught, who have been studying this subject for decades here and have documented things well enough that they could be taken to court. Maybe we need to start paying attention to them. Oh, but we can't because of the fear of ridicule. Well, once again, that is dissipating enough that, dependent on what happens next month, we may see a major cultural, sociological, scientific, governmental, military intelligence shifting of the tectonic plates. Very interesting moment, again, in our culture, our cultural history, and perhaps history per se.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to the disclosure movement. What are your thoughts about the disclosure movement, and how do you feel it is progressing both here and abroad?
You're referring to disclosure with a capital D,
Yes.
which has become, shorthand to more and more people, even outside of the UFO research community, as disclosure of UFO reality. Obviously by the forces that be, by officialdom, by governments, by militaries,
by human beings. Yeah.
Right. But the ones that allegedly, the ones that have the power, the ones that control information that we would like to see the control lessened from. Officially, the disclosure movement kicked off about 20 years ago. And for me, it's evolved into an informal network of groups, not just all over this country, but all over the world, with one primary person really more responsible than anyone else for that. And that is Stephen Bassett, who lives in Washington, D.C., and is the world's only full-time political missing the word at the moment.
I know exactly what you mean, and I'm missing the word too, so it doesn't help. Somebody that
lobbyist. He is
That's
a
it.
lobbyist
For
for
UFOs.
disclosure.
Yeah.
And I was with Steve, I think on his very first trip overseas to speak at a conference. We both spoke at a conference in Liverpool that year. And to see him begin to start to build his overseas and international network. There are disclosure groups now, I'm sure, in well over 100 countries. Many of them are rather modest, and they're not much more than a number of people that get together informally to help educate each other, but more to the point, to help educate other people to the reality and the significance of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity. And it's organic now. It's viral. It is
grassroots.
Yes, very much so. And there are lots of regional groups around the United States. Some of them are affiliated with better known organizations. Others are completely independent. If you go online and look for disclosure websites and Facebook pages and other aspects of social media, you'll find an awful lot of them. What it's not is getting governments to change, their agendas and give up their secrets, but it is influencing the greater understanding and culture at large. And now more and more that it's safer to do so, especially in the States here, elected officials are listening more. I think under all of this, one thing that most of us have in common, whatever our official positions, is we're curious. If this is real, gosh, this is amazing. This is the biggest story of my life or anybody's life in many
the millennium.
respects.
Yeah.
Yes, of the millennium for sure. And if it's true, as many of us,
suspect,
I have never been abducted by other intelligences, but as a research specialist and a longtime investigator, and as the assistant for many years of the pioneer researcher in that field, Bud Hopkins, I've met and spent time, certainly without exaggerating, with several hundred people who I'm convinced have had these kinds of experiences both here and abroad. And just opening oneself up to that really happens to real people, and that, your cousin or your friend from work or a relative actually saw something that might be a machine from off this planet, or interfaced with an intelligence or beings that are not human, but dwarf us in terms of advanced technology. Everybody goes through their own BCAD, if you know what I mean. I see that phrase as convenient in terms of events in our life, often informed by great happiness or tragedy that we measure forwards and back from in our lives, but also in culture. And I think anybody that begins to take the subject seriously, whether it's because they're intellectually curious or because they've had a sighting or an event or somebody that they know and truly trust and believe has confided to them that they have had something like that happen, or they have read something profoundly well documented, you go through a transformation, even if it's a quiet one and it's internal, from I never really thought about that and never took it seriously to holy shit, we're not alone. or we don't seem to be alone. And if that's true, then everything I thought I knew is now open to question. People in power want to maintain the illusion of power. It's part of being powerful. And let's face it, the people who hold the power on this earth are pretty much the people who have been holding the power for the last 50 years, 100 years, hundreds of years longer. They're white guys. In 1947, many of them had been involved in World War II. Many of them were real patriots. They loved their country. We had just helped save the world for democracy and defeated fascism. And now we're facing a new threat, Soviet communism. And all of a sudden we've got this dump of information that we've got to pull the wagons in a circle around. Something crashed. It's not from here. We can't tell people that. Why? Well, one of the reasons is if we do, our power is going to look very diminished. If there's space guys out there with technology like this, the illusion of, American exceptionalism, as it's called now, is now, if there's guys out there whose technology dwarfs us, makes us look like we're still working on steam, where they're on power sources we can't even imagine. We can't let the people know about that, in part because it just makes us look weaker, vulnerable. And I'm a tough guy. I'm a legend in my own mind. I'm powerful, or I thought I was, but the illusion is better than nothing. And that's part of also what the secret keeping has been about. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah, that's very true. Let me move on to another subject here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to discuss Bud Hopkins, who is a pioneer in abduction research, and to address a almost perennial accusation that anyone that's involved in hypnosis or hypnotherapy to help uncover memories that either were so traumatic that some part of our own consciousness has blotted it out, or that the creatures, for lack of a better term, involved in doing the abducting have put there as screen memories to block out what they actually did. Can you address that?
Yeah, great question. Let's go back even further than Bud. Coming out of World War II, it's something that happens in every war. And, for those of us that have never been in combat, we think we can imagine, because we've seen war movies and read books and things. We have no idea what it's like.
We have no idea. And
to come out of vicious combat situations and return to civilian life you're always going to be accompanied by memories, many of them horrific beyond belief, beyond imagining for somebody that wasn't there. Some men, primarily, of course, because they're the ones who have been involved in most combat historically, find ways to compartmentalize these awful memories and sequester them and move forward and try to live a, we'll laughingly call a normal life. That takes great control, and you're always at effect of it. It's like, don't think about the elephant behind the brick wall. Mm-hmm. Right. Good luck with that one. Others are at complete effect of them and are driven crazy or live with a certain dread or terror or paranoia or phobias for the rest of their lives, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to forge normal human relationships. I think you all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We've called it different things. Coming out of World War I, it was shell shock.
Shocked. Yeah.
Coming out of World War II, the term was, I forget, but it's
can't help you with that one.
Yeah. It'll come back to me. We call it different things, but it's post-traumatic stress disorder of the first kind. Coming out of World War II, a really brilliant, I think Boston-based psychiatrist, Dr. Simon, I forget his first name,
Benjamin,
began to work with combat veterans who were not doing well, and developed regressive hypnosis to assist them in either making their peace with these memories or facing them for the first time, or. Dr. Simon had a lot of positive results, and that has nothing, of course, to do with UFOs. It's simply an example of how, with the right clinician, used responsibly in a way that serves the individual, regressive hypnosis is an extremely good tool to assist human beings in certain situations. Fact. In the 1960s, after Betty and Barney Hill became public figures, anybody that doesn't know, first major abduction case, couple from New Hampshire. Betty and Barney
Hill,
yes, worked with Dr. Simon. I'm trying to remember how Betty heard about him. She felt it was really important that they do this. Barney did not want to. And
weren't they? Now I'm missing the word. When your doctor hands you off to another doctor.
May have been the case.
Referred. What weren't they referred by their family physician, their GP?
May well have been the case, Cardinal. Again, easy enough to find out.
Yeah.
Certainly a number of books here, and their niece, Kathleen Martin, is a dear friend and close colleague. One way or the other, they decided Barney did definitely not want to do it, and he's reliving it because those tapes are now available. They've been digitized, and I've heard them, and they are quite shattering. But Dr. Simon was able to bring them back completely separately. So neither one knew what the other's recall was, and the match was really flawless. Moving ahead into the 1970s, a painter in New York with a great intellect, who had a UFO sighting in the mid-60s in Cape Cod, becomes involved in UFO studies. A local businessman who he knew had an experience, profound, shattering, observing a landing, named George Obarski. The man who became very interested in the subject was Bud Hopkins. This was really not much more than a year before, well, even less than a year before I became obsessed with the subject, after my return memory of a childhood sighting with my sister Helen, and her telling me about her remembered parts of her UFO abduction experience. This before really the only thing out there was Betty and Barney Hill and perhaps a little bit of erotica. Anyway, Bud and I meet very early on at this time in 1976. It's about 5 years before his first book is even published. And our acquaintanceship becomes a friendship. 1981, he publishes Missing Time, a real game changer, and goes on to become the very well-known UFO author, investigator, researcher, Bud Hopkins. Bud felt that to better explore the experiences of the people who were coming to him, regressive hypnosis would be, again, having studied Dr. Simon's work, a valuable tool. So what did he do? He didn't go out and buy a book on hypnosis and start to practice it. He didn't take a little class and, put a shingle on his wall. He consulted with one of the most respected psychologists in America using regressive hypnosis. Her name was Aphrodite Clamar. I think his first book may be dedicated to her. Dr. Clamar taught him the technique that she used, and then Hopkins started to use it. Here's something that most people don't know. For the first 7 years that Bud worked with people who alleged to have these kind of experiences and used hypnotic regression with them, which was certainly not always the case. And it was always at their request, not his, unless, their request. For 7 years, Dr. Clamar oversaw what he was doing. He ran all of his cases by her, shared the tape recordings of the sessions, learned as he went based on her far greater knowledge. It made him, I think, one of the most effective and successful people in terms of understanding the dynamics of this tool and using it in a way that served the people that came to him. The bigger question here, I think, Cardinal, is one that I'm seeing a resurgence of the last year or so, and almost always, and I'm making an educated guess here, by people who have never studied regressive hypnosis, who have never been regressively hypnotized, who have an attitude about it that is, in their mind, whoever's doing it is probably manipulating these people. They've got an agenda, and why ever they have it, but they're using this technique to validate their belief, and sometimes it may be a kind of twisted belief. The value.
Sorry, I was muted there. At best is what I was saying.
Yeah. The value of any hypnotic regression is going to be a function of the training of the individual that's conducting it, their sensitivity, their empathy, their patience and their skill, their objectivity, and their concern about the person who has approached them to do it. I can tell you for a fact, because I was there on many times when it would come up, somebody who has been feeling this, has memories, bounce it off of people in the family who confirm the memories. This runs in bloodlines.
Yeah.
I had a guest on my show the other night, Deb Jordan Campbell, one of my favorite people in the world. Deb is the central subject of Bud Hopkins' most best-selling book, certainly, on a very important abduction event that took place in Indiana in the 80s. Book's called Intruders. And Deb has a certain scoop mark scar on a certain part of her leg, a very common one for people that have these events. And her mother has the same mark in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
She said, her first reaction was, well, maybe it's a birthmark. Well, no, Mothers and daughters, I don't think, are subject to identical birthmarks.
That
And
would
this
be
ain't a birthmark.
extremely coincidental. Yeah.
This is a scoop mark.
It's a biopsy.
Yeah, exactly. Or the equivalent. Anyway, there is plenty of physical proof. And when somebody approached Bud and said, I am interested in doing regressive hypnosis, and I can't stress this strongly enough, his first question would always be, are you sure? These are some reasons that you might not want to. These are some reasons that you might want to. And I have to adjust what I said before. There were incidences where he did suggest to people that they might want to explore their partial memories or their phobias or this history or where they got that scar through regressive hypnosis with these understandings of this is possible things that can happen to you that could be unpleasant or anxiety provoking. These are some benefits that you could get if you do it. I should say here also, I've personally undergone regressive hypnosis 3 times with 3 different practitioners, partly because I wanted to see what it was like if I'm working with somebody that's doing it, and partly because this happened to my sister.
Well done, by the way.
Thank you.
That's
I wanted
extremely important
to know if there was anything in my subconscious that went beyond the memories that I had come back into my life after being repressed for 14 years that might tell me more. The first session that I did was kind of a bust, and I thought it would be. It was an old friend of mine who had taken a class in hypnosis and was
weekend
looking for
certification.
Yeah, I forget, but it's like over 40 years ago. But it was looking for somebody to hypnotize and had no understanding, appreciation, or real interest in UFOs. So nothing really came of it. But my first 2 mentors, one was Bud, and the other was a tough, no-nonsense New York City police detective who had undergone special training in hypnotic regression, paid for by the NYPD, to use that as a tool in certain criminal investigations. And I know of one that was a huge case that he helped bust open, using hypnotic regression as a tool. Again, to come back to the main question here, in the wrong hands, hypnotic regression in trying to establish the greater reality of a UFO event or memory is absolutely irresponsible. And when I say the wrong hands, I mean somebody who does have an agenda. I'll give you an example. About a little over a dozen years ago, I was corresponding with an individual in the United Kingdom somewhere who had contacted me and also contacted a well-known person in the work in the UK. We both knew, myself and my colleague, that we were both in touch with this individual, and we were both increasingly impressed with the scans he was showing us of journals that went back to childhood, of drawings, of dream journals, of certain key extraordinary paranoias or phobias, the deep desire to explore this further. His biggest challenge, though, was he had a very responsible position in law enforcement in a small town. He talked to nobody about this, not to family members, not to his wife, certainly not to colleagues, but he very much wanted to come to America and work with Bud Hopkins or at the least somebody in the UK who we felt was responsible enough and credible and accredited enough that we would recommend them. I should say here that over the years that I worked with Bud, we built up quite a referral network, especially once Intruders Foundation, the nonprofit that he created to help educate the public and outreach to assist people who had had experiences, really took hold. we had a referral network of probably close to 100 individuals.
Wow.
And they were psychiatric social workers, counselors, psychologists, a handful of psychiatrists, physicians, different kinds of therapists, responsible people in the healing trades.
Is it likely that I know some of their names, or is this completely under the radar?
Well, we're talking quite a number of years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them were just practitioners, a handful of whom confided to Bud, and it was always moving to get this account. The reason I became a psychologist or a social worker or a counselor is because this happened to me when I was young. And I know it's real. And I can't talk about it because I've lost my license to practice my discipline here. But I want you to know that I take it seriously. If you have somebody in my area that needs somebody to talk to, and know that they will be respected. If they've had these kinds of experiences, I am available. If they were a fully professional level, psychiatrist, psychologist, that kind of thing, and they were used to getting paid, they either did it gratis or had a sliding scale that could accommodate an individual. Anyway, interestingly, the conference that I mentioned before that Steve Bassett and I spoke at in Liverpool, myself and another colleague had worked out by mail with this individual who lived in another part of the UK that they were going to take the day off and give their family a pretext and come to Liverpool, and that we were going to meet, all very surreptitiously. Myself and my colleague made an excuse. We're going out and take an extra hour or so. We're going to have a pub lunch. And we met at this pub, us meeting him for the first time. We each ordered a beer and we sat in a corner and we talked for about an hour and a half. I don't think I even took a sip of it. He ended up giving me originals of his journals, of photos of scars that he had on his body that were completely unaccounted for, a dream journal, to give to Bud Hopkins, that Bud would then return to him, by mail after a fashion. But my colleague and I left there saying, this guy is the goods. There's no question in our mind. And we should certainly assist him in finding somebody who is accredited and who is respectful of the subject. And my colleague had somebody in his referral network who was a psychologist who was trained in doing hypnotic regression. I should also say here, I was talking about the Intruders Foundation file at the time, which was a Rolodex. Some of us remember them, all pre-digital, that had all of these names on it. And names stayed in the Rolodex, not based on what they reported back to us about somebody who was an experiencer or an abductee. That was between them and the abductee as far as what mattered to us was, okay, you saw this so-called professional, what was your impression of them? And if they had an issue, that card disappeared out of the Rolodex.
Right.
Nothing personal, but we had our priorities set like that. Anyway, this individual takes another day off, goes to London, where this psychologist was, and does an initial hypnotic regression. Well, within a day, my colleague contacted me and said, I think we have an issue here. And I spoke with this gentleman in the UK, and he told me what he had told my colleague, which was the man we sent him to was very respectful, seemed very professional, put him under. And, hypnosis is no more than a state of deep relaxation.
Right.
That you either want to do and you play into fully as you can or not. I waited until I was really ready personally. And the 2 regressions I did that counted were remarkable experiences. I was told by Bud and Detective Sergeant Mazzola that I went into alpha very deep, and that is the deepest level. Let me tell you, people experience hypnosis, regressive hypnosis, very differently. I was 14 again. It wasn't an intellectual thing. I was 14 years old again. I was smelling those smells. I was using the language I would have used as a 14-year-old. It was amazing, very valuable.
Smelled the grass.
Yeah, and I wasn't abducted. I should say, for anybody right now who is interested in learning more about that experience that I had and what actually happened to my sister, go to YouTube and go to the Richard Dolan Show. Among the free offerings of the Richard Dolan Show is an interview with me, an extended illustrated interview with me. The key name there is Helen Wheels, who is my sister's professional performing name. Helen Robbins was a real name. And it's about 70 minutes, and we'll explain a lot more about that. Anyway.
A great program and a great episode in particular.
Thank you. Well, Richard's an amazing interviewer for sure, and he happens to be a dear friend and of almost 20 years. And in fact, I hung out on Sunday, neither here nor there, but talking to this guy, I almost fell off my chair. He's very polite in reporting back to me and my colleague. And he said once he was fully under, the therapist knows the backstory, of course, now, and he sets the scene. You're in such and such location, and you look up, and what do you see? And he describes it. And the guy's next question was, what did the spaceship look like?
Yeah.
Oh, no. And
is there a more leading question?
This guy, he was mortified. He was so apologetic, but he did admit that he had more than a passing interest in the subject. He was quite obsessed with it. He was writing a book about it. He let his enthusiasm run away with him. We all understood these things happen, but we never referred anybody to him again.
Sure, obviously.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. Kathleen Martin is a name in the work that you should respect. Kathleen is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. She's had a lifelong interest in this subject. She has a background in social work and education. She's MUFON organization's head person in terms of abduction studies. She is a very experienced hypnotherapist. Her intentions are good. I have a dear friend and a colleague in New York City. He is a psychologist. He is also well-trained in regressive hypnosis. He and Bud were close colleagues. Bud started to refer people to him. And not 2 months ago, an acquaintance of mine out of the country contacted me and said, I have a friend who has had these experiences. He confides to me about them, but he won't talk to his wife about them. He is at that point where he really wants to explore this further. He's gone as far as he can in his own mind. Mm-hmm. Do you think you can help him? And we emailed back and forth. We spoke on the phone. We spoke on Skype. He really wanted to do it. I said, well, I get that, but you need to speak to, I have a friend who is in New York City who is absolutely qualified. And they met and they talked, and he has now done his first session, and he found it of tremendous value. Again, any tool in less than fully responsible hands is, it's like a power tool.
Let me ask you this. In what way did he find it so useful?
Number one, because I asked him, I didn't ask him, but he contacted me to tell me after. First of all of the things that he remembered consciously, he remembered in enhanced detail. He was there again. I mean, a history of events, but obviously starting with one. he was able to face the event in a way where he actually understood, I'm not crazy. This was not my misunderstanding something. This actually happened to me. And I had every right to be anxious and frightened at certain points when it was happening to me. I now get it. I have made my peace with the reality of this particular event. I can accept that this happened to me and know that if I want to, and he's already made an appointment for a second session, if I want to explore this more with this individual, I get that he's qualified. I get that he cares. I get that he is knowledgeable and in the healing arts for the right reason.
He's empathetic.
Yes. And he's fully professional and he's got no axe to grind and he's not working on a book. He's the right stuff. And for, I'll call him John, the person that went into this event, he did something. I've never asked for a penny in terms of people contacting me and doing my best to hear them out. Be a voice in the wilderness sometimes because they don't have anybody else to talk to, assist them when I can, to find somebody to help them on a more direct level. I'm proud of that fact. And in this case, I saw it really assist somebody in being able to breathe deeper and know that what everything they suspected seems like it really is exactly what they thought it was. And it's like Bud's support group meetings, almost all of which I attended in the role of his assistant.
Mm-hmm.
It was a real privilege, Cardinal. I mean, here are these people, many of them who have been through a certain amount of hell on their own, or anxiety, or loneliness. Yes, of course, there are people who have positive experiences, and more of those reports are dominating the research community, and that's wonderful. But it doesn't in any way negate, and even John Mack, who is usually associated with the positive aspect of this, John told me, I mean, I knew John from when he first started was involved in the work, and became friends and colleagues with Bud, that absolutely he acknowledged that people who were coming to him, other people he was meeting, were having traumatic experiences. The difference is that John chose consciously to focus in as an investigative researcher in this subject on what was positive, what was transformative, what could be of value to humanity in these contacts with other intelligences, where Bud was more or less doing his best to do triage to assist people in, yes, these things happen and you're not alone and you're here. You can still have dreams and fall in love and get on with your life. Yes, it may happen again, but you're not crazy, even though maybe you wish that somebody would tell you you were. And I've met quite a number of people who felt that would have been preferable and even had very emotional reactions.
Because as Whitley Strieber said, you can get better if you're crazy.
That's right. And Whitley is one of the most articulate spokespeople for this.
Certainly, yeah.
Also, again, Whitley's a good person to be coming onto at this point, in that his initial experiences were traumatic for him, for his family, for his friends. He was suicidal. And I'm not speaking out of school here. This is all on the record.
On the record, yeah.
Yeah. And I met him just before the book came out, because he had asked Bud if there was somebody that he knew that, you know, he'd worked very closely with Bud for a long time. Bud helped him find the therapist that helped him, actually connected him up with the artist that did that book cover that probably added tremendously to his book sales over the years. But at a certain point, before that book was published, he asked Bud if he knew of somebody who absolutely took this subject seriously, was either an experiencer or had a deep appreciation for what they went through, was a good editor, and somebody who could be trusted with keeping a secret, to read his manuscript. It had been professionally proofread, but not for typos and punctuation problems, but
Or
for
content. Yeah.
Yeah. And he asked me to do it, which was quite an experience because he wouldn't send it to me. I had to go to his loft one morning and read it there. And it was like a 9-hour job.
Yeah.
I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner there, and otherwise sat in that room and read that manuscript. But Whitley went on to very famously develop positive relationships with the group of other intelligences that he continues to interface with, and that's great. And just a reminder also that this isn't about good or bad. We have the experiences we have, and it's not necessarily a direct result of their intentions. Although I can't say, for a fact what it is. It's all guesswork, no matter how deeply involved you are. And that includes what they tell you, because even if they are good overall, for whatever that word means, it doesn't mean that they tell the truth 100% any more than human beings do. In fact,
Yeah.
there may be more parallels than any of us imagined in that.
I have one rapid fire question for you because I realize that we're wrapping up here. Are you familiar with Mark Davenport and his book, Visitors from Time, The Secret of the UFOs?
Leah Haley and I used to correspond in the 90s, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Mark and I have a passing acquaintance, again, haven't been in touch with him in years.
He's been dead for years.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I...
Or at least they took the liberty of burying him.
Although in this work, yeah, exactly. I remember when the book came out. I remember going through it, but no, I have no opinion on it because it'd be based on just not enough information to have an informed opinion.
If you do own a copy, and you can make the time, I know that you'd have to be all elbows in there to make that time, but I really recommend it. Mark was a good friend of mine, both Leah and Mark, and his hypothesis that they are us from the future not only makes a lot of sense, but he's well known for reducing very heady concepts to a level that just about anyone can understand. Concepts like time dilation and field propulsion, things like that. So
I actually don't have a copy of it, and maybe I should, because that, in my world of anything is possible, at least theoretically, that's the one that I have the hardest time with. That's the one that really pushes the envelope the most for me. It makes the extraterrestrial hypothesis extremely conservative, by comparison, as far as I'm concerned. But
it's funny because I've heard that before. And, one thing that he said was, people seem to be weirded out by the idea that they're a lot like us. They're humanoid. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, stereo vision, etc. And then he also mentioned when I put him on in town here, I put on his lecture twice, that they seem to recognize our calendar. They recognize state boundaries. They recognize all these things that are completely human invention. And
how does he go about establishing these things in some empirical, proof-worthy way?
The book is really heavily footnoted to the degree you almost wish it weren't. His understanding of case lore was huge. He was as I said at the beginning of our talk here, state sectional director for MUFON. He was good friends with Tom Nickel, who was the state director for MUFON here in Kansas. And that wasn't his first book. And of course, he was the editor of Contact Forum, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And, between him and Leah Haley, they ran Greenleaf Publications and published other people's books. And,
Yeah, I remember that.
He was really well versed in the literature. So definitely put it on your list. Or if you see a book-sized package around Hanukkah time, definitely double check who it's from, and then it doesn't have any silly little devices on it.
Okay.
I do want to go ahead and start wrapping up with our giveaway. We have 6 people in the chat, which means there are 6 people that we can choose from. If you are at all interested in the giveaway of this DVD, James Forrestal, The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death by Mr. Peter Robbins, go ahead and put a number between 1 and 6 next to your name. Just pop in the chat there. And as we did before, Peter, I'll have you pick a number between 1 and 6, or between 0 and 7, I suppose. That way we'll include 1 and 6. And just the 1 this time. We won't have to go through the doing away with the initial number.
Now,
Ivanovich says it's good you want one. So we'll wait for other people to get their answers in. We are running out of time. So please go ahead and get your number in there. And while people are getting their number in, is there a way that you can do a 2-minute pitch for the DVD?
James Forrestal was the first Secretary of Defense of the United States. He lived a remarkable life. He was almost the stuff that literature is made up of. He seems almost like an invented character in a book. He rose from very modest background to become the second most powerful person in the world, arguably, and was sworn in as our first Secretary of Defense only about 2 months after something crashed on the plains outside of Roswell, New Mexico. He inherited the entire UFO reality. He knew as much as the president at any given point, and the stress and the frustration of not being able to do a damn thing about it over the course of his time at the Department of Defense contributed to a profound nervous breakdown and ultimately his murder, as opposed to suicide, which is what is put forward in the public record. And many years of study of his life and the events surrounding his death compelled me to put this together. And I think beyond a reasonable doubt to establish that, in fact, he was murdered. And in my conclusions, to tell you as best I can why, and ultimately why it's important that we remember this great American.
And I've seen this documentary. Obviously, I bought a copy, and you were kind enough to personalize and autograph it for me, and I really appreciate that because I do collect author autographs, as you know, and I can hardly recommend this. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the guessing the numbers at this point. We have a 1, a 4, and a 2. Peter, can you tell me what your number was?
Well, it was 3, actually.
Okay. So we've got a 4 and a 2. So now pick 4 or 2.
2.
That's as random as anything because you don't know who they are. So, okay. So 2 will give us actually Darius Munchausen. So congratulations. And we will get that information taken care of. It's been a wonderful talk, Peter, as always. Scintillating conversation, knowledgeable, and expert as always. I really want to thank you for being on Into the Fringe, and to let everyone know that Peter will be with us, God willing, on the third Thursday of every month for the next 3 or 4 months or so. And again, it's been a wonderful pleasure having you. Thanks
Be
for
well.
We'll see you later.
Bye for now, gang.